Before Natlan was released, it was the single most mysterious nation in the game, with a stark lack of NPCs hailing from there and little documentation about its culture aside from a few remarks from adventurer NPCs and the talking stick claymore. However, there was one major source that many lore enthusiasts looked to in search for the most important Natlan crumbs, and that was the Genshin Impact webcomic released in 2019, which had Venti drop lore on Vennessa's origins. So for the longest time, Vennessa had been our strongest link to Natlan. And yet when the region came out, it seems like we've all but discarded that link, no longer thinking about how Vennessa's lore fits with the information we're now learning about Natlan. So today, I'm going to try to restore that link by reconciling what we've learned from the webcomic and what we've learned from the game. And we might just find out something really interesting about Natlan's hidden history. After that, I'll also include a couple of bonus theories that I thought of regarding Natlan, since they're very short and admittedly kinda stupid, so I don't think they'd warrant entire videos dedicated to them. And at the very end of the video, I'm going to include a channel update for my dedicated subscribers to let you guys know about the possible changes coming to this channel soon. With that, let's get right into it. As far as the main story is concerned, Vennessa is a historical figure from Mondstadt, and her relevance comes from her liberation of the nation from the aristocracy more than anything else. She's so greatly intertwined with Mondstadt's lore that on the surface it doesn't seem necessary to dissect her identity outside of being a Mondstadter. When you hear about her from the game through dialogue alone, you would probably think that she's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Mondstadt native. It's only when you read the webtoon when you realize it isn't the case. Her immigrant origins have a direct impact on her characterization because her origins are the reason why she was enslaved in the first place, and her ability to bring back freedom to Mondstadt fully cemented the nation as an inclusive country, nearly mirroring real-life historical events involving emancipation from slavery. It also cements Mondstadt as an inclusive nation, which is why it currently serves as the home of 3 foreigners and 1 character with a foreign ancestor. However, while her being from Natlan impacts her character and has lots of implications on Mondstadt's history, this trait of hers doesn't necessarily have an effect on Natlan. She didn't really do anything heroic for her nation of origin, and it's implied that she grew up as a nomad, traveling the northern plains, no longer being connected to Natlan culture. This is evident in her having a Western name corresponding to Mondstadt culture, and the fact that Venti had to teach her about her own origins since she was no longer told those kinds of stories. So it makes sense that there wouldn't be any mention of her in particular throughout the lore we picked up in Natlan. But that's not what I'm looking for when I'm trying to make a link between her and Natlan. What I'm curious about is the reason why her clan had to leave Natlan in the first place, especially since this is apparently a violation of tribal customs. Something major must have happened to prompt her people to leave in spite of their own beliefs against doing so. And yet I'm hard-pressed to find substantial information about an exodus that occurred in Natlan. Surely, with their love for stories, they would have documented an event where hundreds of their people had to flee, right? For a game like Genshin written with so much interconnectedness and planned setups for future events or references, this disparity seems a bit out of place. Hence, although I think the writers might have forgotten about Vennessa in the meantime, I'm hoping that the game would eventually explain this further, and I'm going to try to come up with a guess about what the explanation could be. There's actually this one detail about Vennessa that bothers me a lot, and yet at the same time could potentially lead us to some answers. It's the mere fact that, according to Venti, her people are known for their red hair. Like in the webcomic, literally everyone from Vennessa's clan had red hair. It's not a big deal if only she had that red hair, but it's apparently a sort of genetic feature of her people. It kinda seems like the way all Conrians have primogem eyes, and yet that's not something we observe in modern-day Natlan. Now, I wouldn't put it past Genshin to forget details of lore they mention like 4 to 5 years apart from each other, but think about this. Yansan was fully designed prior to September 2020 as she was released in the Travail teaser, and yet she wasn't given red hair. I take that to mean that the disparity was probably intentional, that there was something that gave Vennessa's people red hair that modern Natlan natives don't possess. While I can't say for sure what it is exactly that gave Vennessa's people red hair, to me it seems like they might have been a whole tribe on their own. Venti described her people as flame-touched Muratans. And long story short, Muratan is basically just a mistranslation that simply meant from Natlan, but the modifier flame-touched might indicate that Vennessa's people are a specific type of Natlanian. Then again, all Natlanians know how to use phlogiston, so maybe that's why they're flame-touched in general. But the webcomic also refers to them as children of Murata or children of the Lady of Fire, which aren't names that are often used nowadays in Natlan. Typically, you'd mention their actual tribe names. These signs make me think that Vennessa's people weren't just Natlanian in general, but hailing from a separate tribe within Natlan, and I'm guessing they might have been the tribe with the closest allegiance to the Pyro Archon and was mainly designated to serve her. Sorta like a Pyro tribe if there was one. And that would complete all the 7 elements. Although if that were the case, maybe their actual tribe name would have been mentioned in Natlan lore by now. Another way to think about it is they weren't necessarily a separate tribe with their own name, but they found a way to sorta establish a unique identity united by some similar characteristics. Maybe they all served as personal aides of the Pyro Archon and had to address a similar crisis together, and were forced to leave Natlan together. The closest thing I found that seems to align with this idea would be the city of Natlan, also known as the Cinder City. It was built by the followers of Xabalanque and is now abandoned, sitting at the north of the Flower Feather clan. It used to be ruled by the tyrant Ochkan and was liberated by the Scarlet-Eyed Hero somewhat shortly after its establishment, unless Ochkan lived for a really long time. For context, Ochkan lived around the same time as Xabalanque, but I think Xabalanque died before Ochkan did. Of course, Xabalanque isn't a female Pyro Archon, so Venti was definitely referencing a different Pyro Archon that took her seat around a millennium later. So I'm not sure if Ochkanatlan's liberation from Ochkan would be too early for a fragmented, leaderless tribe to end up wandering around the area near Mondstadt during the rule of the aristocracy. But this is the closest thing I could come up with. After all, they could have vacated Cinder City and Natlan long after Ochkan actually died. Although Cinder City seems to have been burned during the rebellion against Ochkan, it might have potentially been reconstructed before it was ultimately abandoned again, or maybe its people remained nomadic within Natlan before venturing out a millennium later. I just thought that it fits that there were people inhabiting this place but are not explicitly named and are also displaced. I wonder if their being from Cinder City gave them red hair, and that's a characteristic that united them all the way until they ultimately left Natlan altogether. So who cares if Vennessa has roots from Cinder City or Ochkanatlan? Well, I think it could provide us with the necessary information to characterize the exodus of this group of Natlanians who traveled to Mondstadt, further informing us regarding the complex chain of historical events throughout Tevat. It could also teach us about the consequences of having tribes within Natlan fizzle out and the possible journey it would take to regain lost knowledge from a supposedly lost group of people. Aside from that, well, we have 2 Natlan characters with red hair, namely Chaska and Mavuika. Of course, in Genshin, no one really has ownership over hair colors, like Diluc's ancestor, the red-haired warrior, had red hair long before Vennessa came to Mondstadt. Even Nilou has red hair, and she's unrelated to any of this. But with Chaska being adopted and the Flower Feather clan's proximity to Ochkanatlan, I wonder if there could have been some kind of connection there. Maybe that also explains the rare disease she has, I wonder. As for Mavuika, before 5.0 came out, I didn't know that she was a human, and I thought, well, maybe Vennessa's people had red hair because their Archon had red hair, like maybe she gave them red hair or something. But knowing that Mavuika was born after Vennessa lived, I wonder if her red hair is a manifestation of ancient roots from Ochkanatlan as well. Although her sister and parents don't have red hair, it could be a sort of recessive gene or something that arises only under a specific condition, like maybe after possessing a certain amount of phlogiston concentration or something, or obtaining some sort of blessing. Or she could just be adopted, I don't know. I mean, it totally is possible that she could have red hair just because, and it doesn't tie with Vennessa's people at all. But if it did, that would be a really amazing way for the writers to tie in everything together without loose ends. So yeah, all of that to say, I hope to learn more about Ochka Natlan, or maybe some other unnamed group of red-haired people, to understand the ins and outs of Natlan even further, regardless of whether it has any impact on our playable characters or not. Now, I don't exactly have the best conclusion for the stuff I thought of regarding Vennessa, red hair, and Ochka Natlan, but I did mention earlier that I have some additional random and flimsy theories, so let me share the first one. There's not much to it, but it's simply that Xabalanque might have had a secret twin because he was named after the Mayan hero twins Xabalanque and Hunahpu. For a storyline that simply loves to incorporate twins, it seems weird that the Genshin writers would intentionally pick out the name of one half of a pair of twins without including the other one. Heck, they even created two historical characters named Atahualpa and Huascar, who were twins that, oddly enough, hailed from different tribes. And the thing is, the real Atahualpa and Huascar weren't even twins, they were half-brothers. Aside from that, hero twins are a common motif in Native American culture, so the writers must have selected some twins intentionally. Although Hunahpu hasn't been mentioned at all in Genshin yet, I wonder if that'll come to light eventually. Perhaps it was a sort of shadow twin situation that was kept from public knowledge, just like A and Makoto. Again, this is just a haphazard theory that doesn't come from in-game proof, but from assumptions based on the writer's intentions, so don't take this one too seriously, it's just something fun to think about. The second and last bonus theory that I thought of is really strange, but I couldn't help but discuss it anyway. Remember that one wild and silly unvoiced quest with all the Sumeru characters that was only available in version 4.8? It followed the journey of Kaveh to buy a copy of a book which he put marks on, leading people to think there were some deeper clues in the book. Basically, he encircled the first name he saw because he noticed that it was a misspelled version of a historical name in Sumeru. The problem is, this was the name of the character who turned out to be the murderer in a mystery novel, so Al-Haytham took to encircling the second name to throw them off, and Tignari did the same, setting off a chain of people just trying to circle more misspelled names. The book was notoriously badly written, with new powers being inserted in the middle without prior foreshadowing, and Candice considered the misspelling of Al-Ahmar as Al-Ahmal to be disrespectful. I personally really enjoyed the quest because of how it seemed like a piece of crack fanfiction. However, it does make you wonder, what's the point of all of this? It didn't have much to say on its own and didn't drop any important lore. But now I'm wondering if this was actually a way of foreshadowing Natlan a little bit. Don't take this idea too seriously as it's based on flimsy proof. But now I wonder if Mavuika's name was intentionally misspelled because the Maori myth has a goddess of fire named Mahuika, yet none of the translations of Mavuika's name is spelled as Mahuika. For context, misspellings are common in Genshin, but sometimes you can tell that one translation spells it more correctly than the others. For instance, Ororon actually comes from Olorun, the name of the supreme being in Yoruba culture. If you look at the Chinese and Korean transliterations, it does seem like they remain faithful to the original spelling, while English chose to bastardize it. Meanwhile, with Mavuika, it seems like all the translations chose to misspell it. Even the Chinese Maweka seems to be their attempt at recreating a V sound, so I wonder if there was an instruction to deliberately write her name as Mavuika rather than Mahuika. Although we know that ancient names are very important to Natlanians, Shilonen also mentions in her story quest that even regular names are like blessings. With such a strong emphasis on names in Natlanian culture, I wonder if Mavuika's name being misspelled means something. Like, what if she has a different form or alternate identity where she's actually Mahuika? My one friend did mention that there's been a pattern of all the new Archons having some sort of twin aspect to them and a sort of not the real Archon plot teasing going along with them. And my friend theorized that this is because they were created in the same way that Aether and Lumine were created. In the same vein, Mavuika might have her own version of that, where she's actually Mahuika. Again, I admit this theory doesn't hold much water and it doesn't completely encapsulate the intention behind that weird Sumeru book quest either. But I just thought of putting it out there in case there's something more to it. On the other hand, the Sumeru book quest might have just been a result of the Sumeru writer group criticizing the Natlan writer group for its butchering of history and maybe its wild plot. Maybe it's not actually a method of foreshadowing, but still just something to think about. One last thing to think about is not a theory but just a weird observation about Shilonen's skin tone. Compared to the other Natlan characters, her skin feels more accurate due to its tan hue, but in some shots of her in-game model, she looks very white. And I know that skin color inconsistency is common for Genshin, but typically the inconsistency is observed throughout different forms of media of one character. For example, Sino's character icon is much lighter than his in-game model. Mualani's official art and her 2D design in the Natlan teaser has a darker skin tone than her in-game skin tone, yet her splash art is noticeably lighter than her in-game skin tone. I know that skin can sometimes turn lighter under certain lighting, but with Shilonen, the contrast seems to be sharper even within the same in-game model. In the version 5.1 trailer, she looked as white as a Fontaine character when she first appeared for her mini demo, yet a few frames later, she suddenly looks more tan. In this one post of her released on Genshin's official Twitter, she looks noticeably more tan in the center picture than in the two pictures beside her. And that doesn't seem like something that has happened to Kaya, Xinyan, or the desert characters based on the same in-game model. Like, yes, they sometimes look lighter with their in-game skin tones, but not to the point of glaring whiteness. If you look at the other posts for the Natlan characters with the same format as Shilonen's, their skin tones are not that noticeably different across pictures. All of this to say, I wonder if the thing with Shilonen is intentional. Could that be an indicator of something? Will this same phenomenon happen to other Natlan characters? I wonder. I don't know. Maybe it's partially copium to deal with the whitewashing, but I just felt the need to point it out. Anyway, that's all for my additional useless rambles. So if you've seen my past two videos on this channel, then you know how I feel about the designs of the Natlan playable characters and the Hoyoverse's overarching problem of colorism. Because of that, my interest in Genshin has diminished to some degree. Like, I still play the game and keep up with the lore, but I no longer have an endless stream of thoughts about it in general. I also am somewhat hesitant to continue promoting the game because of these flaws. I know many of my viewers are longtime players already, or people who are just keeping up with the lore even though they're no longer playing, but I don't want to contribute to the hype in such a way that would get people excited to spend money on Hoyoverse. All of this to say that I might slowly drift from making Genshin content and I might start to explore creating content about other media I'm engaged in, but I'll also try my best to make the transition gradual by talking about fandom phenomena that applies to both Genshin and other fandoms as well. In my future videos, I'll still probably cite Genshin characters a lot as examples for things I'm talking about, but I might lay off videos that are solely dedicated to discussing the game alone. Anyway, thank you for your continuing support, and I hope that you'll continue to stick with the channel through these changes. I appreciate you all, and I hope to see you again in the next one.